are developments between India and China. China has said that troops have withdrawn from 4 places in Eastern Ladakh and that the situation of the border is relatively stable. This statement comes a day after External Affairs Minister Dr. S. Jaishankar said that about 75% of disengagement problems with China have been sorted out, and both the nations have agreed to work with urgency and redouble their efforts to realize complete disengagement in the remaining areas. This is the first time progress in the disengagement process has been made since the 2020 India-China border clash. However, talks on withdrawing troops from places like Demchok and Depsang are still at an impasse. A couple of days ago, Chinese Foreign Minister Wang met NSA Ajit Doval in St. Petersburg, and the two sides discussed progress made in recent consultations on border issues and agreed to deliver on the common understandings reached by the leaders of the two countries. In that meeting, China agreed to enhance mutual understanding and trust, maintain continuous communication and create conditions for boosting ties. But what really is the way forward and what do the current developments mean? I take this conversation forward. I have with me Major General Gigi Dwivedi. We have with us Major General Dhruv Katoch, Mr. Vijay Kranti, Chairman of Chase, and Pathikrit Payne, geopolitical expert, also with us on the broadcast. Let me begin with Major General Gigi Dwivedi. Major General Dwivedi, what do you make of the latest statements that are coming out of China and the fact that 70 to 75% of the disengagement has been achieved? It's been quite an effort for many years, sir, but what really do you feel will be the way forward?
Well, Devika, I think the political level, diplomatic level interaction have been taking place since quite some time. But ironically, on the ground, the disengagement has not actually fructified completely because two very sensitive areas, that is Depsang, DBO area and Demchok. Well, having commanded my battalion in this
Okay, we seem to have lost that connection with Major General Gigi Dwivedi. If Major General Dhruv Katoch is still with us, I'd like to take the same question until we sort out that connection with Major General Gigi Dwivedi. Major General Dhruv Katoch, bring you into the conversation, sir. Just trying to understand from a military perspective, what really does a 70% disengagement mean, and the fact that China has, or that there is an understanding that certain areas like Depsang and Demchok continue to be sticklers?
Thank you, Devika. General Dwivedi, are you back on?
Okay, yes, I do believe.
Yeah, I'm back on the. I'm back.
Yes, yes, sir. Go ahead, please.
So, therefore, what has happened is that over last 4 years, the 21 rounds of talks have taken place. There were also the working mechanism of coordination consultation. But the issue is there are 3 things which we need to actually flag. First and foremost, yes, the disengagement has taken place, but the new protocols means that at 4 places where disengagement took place north and south of Pagongso and Hot Spring and Galwan, the new protocol is that now they are buffer zones and we are not able to patrol erstwhile what we used to do because there are 65 patrolling points, 29 we are not able to patrol. Second point is that we need to see what are the Chinese strategic intent, the kind of infrastructure development that has taken place in Eastern Ladakh and also in Tibet, opposite Arunachal Pradesh, that actually does not go in sync with what the Chinese are talking about, the peaceful and the dialogue and settlement of the issue. Third point is that 2 very important events took place. One is the new defense law, a new border law, which was instituted in 2022, due to which the Chinese are named about 65 locations in their own language in Chinese, and also they have flag marked areas which they claim, and Arunachal Pradesh is part of their claim line.
Yes.
And the second is that they have made about 640 Xiaokang villages. 1/3 of them are close to the LAC, which will act as the front line post for the PLA. So all I can say is that Chinese, what they say and what they do on the ground, there's a total mismatch. They have been dragging their feet not to pull out from Depsang, where they are almost quite 10 to 15 kilometers beyond the erstwhile line of LAC, and we are not able to patrol the patrolling point for 10 to 13, and also in Demchok, because Depsang is very strategically important for China because of the Karakoram highway. The second issue is that we should keep our guard up, we should keep talking, but at the same time, we should be prepared because the Chinese intent and their strategic thought process is actually hostile, and we cannot take it for granted. And my last point is that Chinese are known to be talking and yet not yielding ground. They are known to take military advantage and then capitalize political advantage, and that's exactly what is going on. But at the same time, we need to keep engaging and ensure that we are able to get our diplomatic ways while preparing and keeping our guard up totally.
Yes, Major and Dhruv Kotoch, bring into the conversation, sir, and taking the points forward that Major General G.G. Dwivedi has also raised. I just want to understand from you, as far as keeping our guard up is concerned, what really then is it that India ought to do? Because while China is disengaging from certain points, we also know, as Major General G.G. Dwivedi pointed out, that a lot of development on certain border areas has already taken place in terms of construction of roads, construction of villages, which China is filling up with Chinese people and other locals as well. And that's really been the strategy that China has employed for many decades now. So keeping all of those factors in mind, what is it that India really needs to focus on?
Thank you, Devika. Firstly, whatever General Dwivedi has said, I totally concur with it. I think that has been a very good assessment and as a start point for this particular discussion. Now, for any of us, or rather for all of us who have actually served on these borders, and we have been sitting on the line of actual control, when you look beyond into the Chinese side, into the Chinese held areas, we notice one thing, that they have built excellent infrastructure, both in terms of roads and other infrastructure. And that sort of stuff is not available on our side. This process of getting our road communications right up to the forward areas really started in earnest, I think about a decade back. Prior to that, all of us who have served there, we all know that nothing was existing. Now it is existing, and that process is still going strong on. Now, actually, it is because of this, because we have started constructing our roads and going forward, that is what became of concern to the Chinese, especially in Depsang. Because otherwise, the Chinese were quite comfortable. They said, okay, the Indians can't come here and we can keep pushing forward. But now they realize that we can also come in there. And that is where the standoff took place, because when they moved forward, we moved forward, and the block took place. Now the question will come, how do you disengage? You see, this disengagement, it has taken place in certain areas. But the question is, are you going to keep 50,000 troops there in Ladakh, deployed permanently for Eastern Ladakh? And is China going to keep the same amount there in Eastern Ladakh, in that area? And that is where I think it's going to be a very tricky point, because I don't think that withdrawal is going to take place in any early time frame. For a simple reason, when the Chinese go back, even if they go back 5 kilometers or 10 kilometers, for them to come back to that line will take simply 1 hour. But for India to come back will take a very long time. I don't think we are in a position to really de-induct troops, because once de-inducted, getting them back in is going to be a very long time job. So unless the border stabilizes to the extent that politically we are absolutely certain that nothing is going to happen, as General Dwivedi, and I totally concur with him, we cannot let the military guard down. That's all. So there may be a political settlement, etc., but I think the military will have to, we have to be deployed in reasonable proximity to where we wish to operate, so that in the time frame in which the Chinese can reach that point, we can also reach in a similar time frame. It is not a question. It is not really in terms of distance. In distance, because the Chinese are talking in terms of distance, they say we both go back 20 kilometers, but our 20 kilometers may take us 6 hours to 1 day to reach. For them, it may be a much shorter time frame. So we can't really discuss in terms of distances. It will have to be discussed in terms of time frames, so that if they push back by 1 day, then we push back by 1 day, regardless of the distance. Now, I think all those things will take time, but for a disengagement to take place, I think it'll take much longer. tranquility, okay, in some sort of, there's no firing, etc., going on. That situation has been achieved. So to that extent, we can say there is tactical stability now. At the strategic level, I think we still require stability at the political level.
Okay.
Devika ji.
All right. Mr. Vijay Kranti, bringing you to the conversation, I want to understand from your perspective, can the disengagement that's taking place along the borders of Ladakh or the LAC, can that be seen in isolation to what really is happening in the northeast of India? Because ultimately some serious questions have to be asked as to who really is supplying the drones and the guns and the bombs that are coming into Manipur and causing mayhem. There are some serious questions that have to be asked, and can what the alleged role of the Chinese in the northeast is versus what they are claiming to be doing along the LAC, can they be looked at in isolation by India?
Surely we cannot see, this development in isolation. And if anybody has the, this misunderstanding that now the problems are solved, they should read the history. In history of not only India-China relations, even in China's own history, with relations with 14 of its border, the other border countries, not even once China has proven that they are reliable partners. And especially with India, I don't think any one of us remembers even one event when Chinese promised something and they didn't go back. That is one thing. So there is no question of, becoming soft on the rest of area. Our border is more than somewhere between 3,000 and 4,000 kilometers. And China's, activity all along rest, as our learned colleagues, General Dwivedi and General Katoch have already explained, that China is, they have dug in their positions, and they have advantage of the plateau of Tibet, whereas we are, as General Katoch mentioned, we are on a hill, a steep hill area. That is one thing. But coming to this agreement, we should remember one thing, that whenever, right from 1954, when the so-called Panchashil agreement was signed, right from that day, whenever there was an engagement and discussion with China, the Chinese leaders have been very, very smartly brushing aside those issues which were inconvenient to them, and on those particular issues where they were preparing against India, so they would like to postpone all those things. Their policy of discussing things on appropriate time and let us leave those things today, that policy has been very serious. And as we see, the Chinese have, after the Galwan incident and the pushback they received from Indian Army and the response they got from India because of engagement of more than 50,000 Indian soldiers all along in that area, what Chinese have discovered, that they are at a great disadvantage when it comes to one-to-one or direct clash with Indian Army. They understand it very well. Their army is neither equipped nor trained for that, nor their DNA is suitable for that area. So what they have done, while dragging these discussions, at least on 4 points, after they received a response from India on Galwan, what they have done, that they, after discovering that they cannot keep their army permanently stationed in this area, they have fortified, they have revised their strategy, they have fortified their positions, they have shifted to air defense. And if you see in Xinjiang and in Tibet, they have gone for those many of those airfields which they are now, which are ready and which they can use for aggression. And I agree with General Katoch when he says that their response time is very short. So we have to match it. So I think we should welcome this whatever agreement has happened, because it will give a little bit of peace. But we will have to remain vigilant, and let us not believe the Chinese on the face value.
Yes.
They have never given us a reason to believe them on face value. So this is time. I would welcome what has happened, this engagement, or if there is a still better, what we are expecting, rest of 25%, it will be good. We should welcome it, but we don't have to drop guard, as General Dwivedi has made clear and General Katoch have made very clear.
Okay, I want to bring Pathikrit Payne into the conversation. Pathikrit, you've heard what the other experts have also said. I just want to understand your perspective on another interesting aspect. When we talk about not looking at the situation in isolation, one has to also look at it from a very geopolitical perspective, considering what's also happened in Bangladesh recently and all the talks about the role of the American deep state in what went down in Bangladesh. Do you feel that somewhere the situation, the ground situation in Bangladesh also prompts a country like China to perhaps reconsider its aggressive position with India and the fact that these talks take place in Russia?
Well, I don't know whether China is concerned to that extent that they would improve their relation with India because something happened in Bangladesh. But one thing is for sure, I would not be surprised if there is a nudge from the Russians in terms of improving relation between India and China. I think what has happened is still a work in progress. But what General Katoch said is very right. Disengagement will not lead to demobilization. So I think there is a realization. See, today Russians are under sanctions. The Chinese also have sanctions. And if you see some of the areas where deliberately engines are being stopped from being supplied for frivolous reasons, there are certain de facto, if not sanctions, some kind of impediments that are being created for India as well. So I think if you look at it the larger perspective, whatever has been achieved, it's still a work in progress. 75% has been, what the External Affairs Minister mentioned, but it has not come just because of geopolitical reasons. It has also come because the Chinese realize that India is not a pushover. They cannot do what they have done with many of the countries of Southeast Asia. And India today speaks relatively from a better position of strength. In the last 3-4 years, the kind of weapon systems that have been deployed in the border areas, the kind of border infrastructure that has been developed, when you have these intercontinental ballistic missiles being tested by India, including MIRV, these are symbolic messages that have been sent that what starts in Ladakh need not end in Ladakh. Malacca Strait is a very, very critical choke point for China. Indians have made it very clear that India can reach Shanghai and Shenzhen. So till the time the Chinese thought that if a conflict starts, it will be in the Tibetan region. It was a buffer zone for them in terms of damages. It doesn't matter much to them in the mainland, in the hinterland. But once Indians made it very clear that we have the capacity to target your special economic zones by those tests, I think a lot changed. At the same time, we must also understand that the Chinese economic situation today is very vulnerable, far more vulnerable than India's, because China suffers from what you call structural overcapacity. Their entire economy is dependent on exports, the exports to the Western European markets and US. For various reasons, there are sanctions, there are trade embargoes, and there is overcapacity. So there are issues of unemployment, there are issues of price war. I think China realizes one thing, that beyond a point, it will be counterproductive for them to have a major conflict with India, because they also need this Indian market. There's $100 billion plus trade surplus almost they have with India. So I think it's a situation where both these countries, it doesn't mean that the bear is going to hug, the dragon is going to hug the elephant. It's not going to be like that. It's a thaw in the situation. It might change tomorrow, you never know, because the Chinese believe in the concept of Middle Kingdom. They believe in the concept of centrality of China. They don't believe in Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. But if you look at and the larger perspective of how the geopolitical churning is going on, potential possibilities of conflicts coming in, the sanctions are being imposed, foreign exchange reserves are being freezed. You need alternate to SWIFT-like situation in terms of banking transactions internationally. I think there are areas of convergence for China and India as well. BRICS is one. Whether it would lead to alternate currency or betterment of relation, we don't know. But the Chinese realize one thing, that India is not a pushover. So that's why there is a thaw. Does it mean it's a hunky-dory? Absolutely not. Indians have also mobilized, deployed, modernized, done everything possible. You know, they have a bigger army, no one denies that. But India has shown enough capability, demonstrated that if push comes to a shove, we know how to choke your choke points, and we know how to reach in your hinterland. But again, the Chinese, I must make on this point, Russia banks a lot on BRICS. So it is in Russian interest as well to see these countries come together. Does it mean everything is better now? No. But there is a realization. So let's see how it works out in future.
Okay, Major General Gigi Vivedi, your thoughts on the same as well, sir. As far as the geopolitics of it all is concerned, what are your thoughts? What really has pushed China to perhaps agree with working with a sense of urgency and redoubling its efforts as far as the border situation on the Western front with India is concerned? But at the same time, one also has to keep in mind, like I posed to Mr. Vijay as well, what really is happening in the northeast of India and China's role in the same.
Well, Devika, absolutely. We need to view our relation with China from two perspectives, bifocal perspective. That is, one is the bilateral aspect, and second is how it is figures into the larger geopolitics. Firstly, bilateral. The border issue is one of the critical issues between us, and we have been always harping on this issue that until borders are stable and peaceful, there can't be actually business as usual. So therefore, for us, the border is a very prime importance, but for Chinese, they wish to put it on the back burner and tackle it when the right time comes. So therefore, there is no convergence on that issue. Well, when you look at the operationally and strategically, as I brought out earlier, and also General Katoch reinforced that issue, that border is basically a military issue, and it has to be tackled militarily. And on that scope, we cannot, leave any ground uncovered, because Chinese have a tactics for nibbling. Wherever they find little vacuum, a little gap, like there was in Tawang, they will actually come in. So therefore, borders today, or the LAC today, is militarized, and it has to be held. No more erstwhile patrolling. And we have to also see what are the infrastructure development that are taking place, because in mountains, it is how you position yourself, how you post yourself, that is very critical, and it is always time and space, means in what time frame you can cover it up. So therefore, I don't think border is going to be solved anytime soon. Yes, disengagement may progress because that's a good optics, but there's going to be no de-escalation, because I think as long as the Chinese are reinforcing the claim on Tibet and also on the 1959 claim line, I don't think there could be any drawdown on the escalation or de-escalation. Coming to the geopolitics, well, India and China are inherently competitors.
Yes.
We also have confrontation, and therefore both the countries are posturing. Well, Chinese have an advantage today. They are the superpower. We are yet gaining that kind of status, but we have to also ensure that we are with right grouping, with right friends, like Quad is there, and in places like BRICS, we should not be playing second fiddle, or in SEO, because that is what the Chinese intent is, that they take the lead and we are asked to take a second position. Well, that is not acceptable. That's where the diplomacy comes. So I feel that defense and diplomacy have to work together. Externally, it has to be more on diplomatic terms, and internally, I think it has to be more in the military terms. David.
Okay, Major and Dhruv Katoch, your thoughts on the same as well, sir. Just want to understand from you as far as the geopolitics of what's happening in this region specifically is concerned, because we've seen a lot of nations going into debt at the hands of what has been called Chinese debt diplomacy, and then we've also seen major developments taking place in Bangladesh where questions have been raised on the role of the American deep state. So does that somewhere the possibility of America having played a role so close to Chinese borders, does that somewhere prompt China to perhaps look at resolving some of its issues with India, or do you feel that that's really not a possibility?
Devika, as far as the Bangladesh issue is concerned, no, I don't think the Chinese are looking at the Bangladesh issue and then saying, okay, now we must resolve our issues with India.
Right.
You see, when looking at Bangladesh, yes, it was the Americans who have inspired it, and they have played. In my view, I think they played a dirty game. But this dirty game has suited the Chinese also. We must remember that when Sheikh Hasina went there, she was given a cold shoulder. I mean, as far as Xi Jinping was concerned, she was quite certain she is not going to be in power much longer. The Chinese wanted her out, and the Americans wanted her out. So for some reason, while both of them are antagonistic to each other, their interests converged on this particular issue. So whether the Chinese will now start interfering in the northeast and all that, that possibility is there, but that's got nothing to do with Bangladesh. I think our concern on the northeast we have to very closely watch the level of Islamization which is taking place and the radicalization which has already taken place in Bangladesh society, which is an open threat to India. That is what we have to look at. As far as why China actually is, looking for a rapprochement sort of thing between India and China on the LAC, it has been said that China's got a much bigger army and all that. But let's face it, it doesn't really matter how big an army they've got. What can they deploy on the Tibetan plateau? And whatever they can employ, we can match. So as far as the Tibetan plateau is concerned, I think we'll take them on and we'll win. But more importantly, it is really the air power over the Tibetan plateau which is going to be the key game changer. And there we will hold them back. And I think the Chinese know that. So that is one point. They know that they cannot browbeat India. The second thing was that they thought that they would, by bullying India, India would back down. But India has shown over the last 4 years the requisite political and military will. I don't think the Chinese expected that. In my view, they didn't expect that. And now they have realized, okay, these chaps aren't going to go back. I mean, the Indian army will stay there for the next 10 years or 100 years if required. The Chinese know it. Can the Chinese PLA stay there? I think they will have a challenge. The challenge is not for us, the challenge is for them. And I think that is one of the reasons why they may be rethinking their policies. That's my view. Devika.
Okay, Mr. Vijay Kranti, your perspective on what Major General Dhruv Katoch has just pointed out, the fact that it was perhaps 4 years ago miscalculation by China, and they're now simply trying to revise some of the mistakes that they'd made.
Yeah, miscalculation or not, but one thing is sure that China always, their strategy is to keep on testing the enemy. So what they have done in Galwan was to, number one, test if where does Indian preparations stand. And they were actually hoping that if they could have succeeded in Galwan, running over Galwan, they could have very easily crossed over to the Siachen side and blocked our Daulat Beg Aldi. And the result would have been that in one stroke, India would have lost its control on Siachen and the threat to Karakoram highway would have gone. So when they got a pushback and they got a rather bleeding nose at the hands of Indian army in Galwan, then they realized where does India stand. And over 4 years, when they have already realized where India is strong, so to compensate that, as I said earlier, they have shifted to air defense. And in East Turkestan, which they occupied and call it Xinjiang, they are using that area and Tibet for their air force engagement. And secondly, they have what they have done in Pangong. We must take note of it. The way they have created a bridge and shortened their deployment time. India should be, I'm sure our policymakers and defense brass, they are aware of it. And to conclude, I would say that finding so-called peace in one corner of this 4,000-kilometer border is not the end of game. The China is already aggressive on all along border from Ladakh to Himachal to Uttarakhand to Arunachal Pradesh. And India must remain vigilant. There is no reason to feel that the issue is over. Thank you.
Okay, all right. I'll leave the last 1 minute with Patrikrit. Patrikrit, what are your concluding thoughts?
is this, that if they want to occupy 2 areas, they will go for 8 and withdraw from 6. So we should look at it as a work in progress and not presume that the whole thing is over. Secondly, when the Chinese today cannot afford a war like many others, they also realize some countries actually want to cut both China and India down to size by actually having a war. When I said there are areas of convergence, now look at this, why I said that. Both the countries want reforms in multilateral institutions like UN. Both want a de-dollarized trade environment in the whole world. Both are against unilateral sanctions, which are imposed by the West. So there are areas, and I would not be surprised if there is a nudge from the Russians that hold your horses right now, have a better environment to fight your war if ever it happens. So I am telling you this, that yes, there is a thaw, and there is a realization in the Chinese also that India is not a pushover. But does it mean that we will be hugging each other? Absolutely not. If a better opportunity comes for the Chinese, they will exactly do what they want to do. But for the time being, they realize that they can't do to India perhaps what they would do to a Vietnam or a Philippines.
For more such videos, subscribe to the NewsX YouTube channel, hit the bell icon.